Welcome to another Kundalini conversation. I'm your host, Brent Spirit. And my guest today is Paul Fredric. Welcome, Paul. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm excited to see where our conversation goes.
Thank you, Brad. I'm super happy to be here. I'm really looking forward to what unfolds.
Me too. So, Paul is a very creative person here. He's a writer, he's the author of The Nibu Generator, a book on Egyptian style wealth magic, The Airbeth Transmissions, a Miltonian demonic space opera. He's also a musician, playing in the bands Morphine Angel and Asmodeus X. He's the host of the podcast Daimonosophy, which I had the honor and the pleasure of having a conversation with Paul a couple weeks ago about my own Kundalini awakening, and we got to talking about some different topics. It was very exciting. But today we're going to unpack Paul and his journey with Kundalini awakening. There's a major event that took place for him in 2021, but of course, as with virtually every person that I've encountered, there seems to be a many building up events throughout one's life that leads to these, very obvious Kundalini awakening moments. So we'll unpack a little bit of Paul's journey. He's got an upcoming book called Second Awakening, which will be all about his spiritual awakening process with Kundalini and some fresh insights. And so today we'll unpack all of these types of things today. We'll see, Paul, what were the challenges you faced in your journey? What were the solutions you found? How has this journey shaped you, changed you, inspired you? We'll see what comes out today together, and we'll take it from there. So, Paul, let us know a little bit about some of those earlier days, leading up to what you identify now to be Kundalini awakening. What was going on for you? What were you exploring that sort of lay the groundwork for this to take place?
Well, my my early upbringing was largely secular. I had some religious family members from a Baptist uh, side of things. And there was a death in the family. My mother remarried into a Catholic family, and so the religion was always there, kind of just on the periphery for me. Now, my father, before he passed away, um, was very intellectual and very open-minded, and he shared with me lots of stories of mythology, Greek mythology, things like this. He was like very well read, and really sort of left religion over there as just sort of, well, that's some people like believe that, but it's not necessarily, we didn't, in my family, we didn't go to church every Sunday or anything like that. And I discovered at an early age, since I had an inquisitive mind and I was interested in these spiritual questions at a very early age, when I would ask questions to Baptist ministers or other religious family members, and I mean, we'd occasionally go to church with the family. When we visited some members of the family, we'd go to church with them. When I would ask questions, and I would ask the same questions I think every child asks about religion. If God is all powerful and all loving, then why do bad things happen to good people? And all the basic questions like that. And what I presumed at a very early age is that these, for the most part, the people who represent the priesthoods of the major world religions themselves do not really know, for the most part, the answers to these questions. So as I became older and into my teen years, still having an interest in these things, I began looking into the esoteric. I began looking into the occult, and to some extent into Eastern religion. I read, Bhagavad Gita and Tao Te Ching and things like that. So, that's kind of a good basis, I guess. Flash forward, after I went to school, I was in a touring band for a while, which you mentioned, Morphine Angel, and we did the road thing with lots of really, you know, lots of hard living involved with that, lots of things that are like really hard on the body. And then still later, a few years after that, I got kind of out of that and began working a secular kind of job where I did a lot of traveling for. It fit in nicely because all of the band touring sort of like in a weird way prepared me for a career in consulting where I would be like traveling around a lot. But again, traveling a lot, you eat lots of bad food, and it's also like really hard on the body. So I ended up getting diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and this is about 2014 now. This is about 2014, and I got put on some medications for it, and just in general, my health was failing. So throughout all this, I kept an interest in the esoteric and occult sorts of subjects and circles. And I started doing the podcast around 2017, and as you mentioned, I published, you know, some books on various subjects and things like that. And also within this milieu of things I'm describing, I also developed the practice of meditation, and this is like about 20 years ago now, when I first, you know, learned meditation practice from people in a Gurdjieff work style of things. And so I kind of took that practice with me, although I didn't practice it consistently over all of that time period. I like to say I was always a half-assed kind of meditator, you know. You know, if I'm feeling stressed out, you know, then and things are looking grim, and if it occurred to me, if I remembered that meditation is something in my toolbox, then I'd go try it for a day or two, and I'd feel a little better from it. There's some, you know, real immediate sort of health, you know, wellness kind of benefits you get from this sort of practice. But my teachers that I had learned this from originally, they'd always, I was told at the very beginning that, you know, to really get the most out of this, you really need to do it every day and get up to doing it about a half hour or so. And I never did that. I went after hearing that sound advice, I went another 2 decades of unhealthy lifestyle and only meditating every once in a while, you know, for, you know, another 20 years or so. But I got to the point, and maybe it was because this was during COVID, and I'm sure a lot of people have stories about when COVID happened, they kind of got a wake up call about certain things, and when COVID did set in, I did kind of get like a wake up call about things, and I'm not sure how to fully articulate it, but I just had this feeling, I just had this sense that I needed to do more, and I had this realization that for the most part, most of the occult, you know, and ceremonial magic type practices and things that I had studied before, while they might have been effective for opening new doors at the time, that they lacked some sense of substance or some sense of permanence as far as like what I was gaining from it. So I just had the sense that I needed to do more, and so I started meditating more, and I started I reconnected with this group where I'd learned the practices from, and just started doing, meeting for, group meditations, like, once a week, and then doing it every day. And I got to a point where I was doing it a half hour a day. And this proceeded for about 2 years of this practice. And that is when eventually, one day I went to go meditate, and something new happened. And sort of a preliminary thing for this, like just before I went into this meditation session, I'd been going through some exercises with a teacher on vibrations, like on intoning your voice to do vibrations within the body moving upwards, which was chakras, right? Vibrating with each chakra, even though I had never really worked with chakras before, although I'm a very musical person. I'm a very auditory person. So I don't know if that had, something to do with it. But when I next went in to meditate, it was like there was a fusion between breath and sensation and attention in like this one fluid movement. And there was a welling up of energy moving up through me that was highly sensual, in some sense, and it was just absolutely incredible. And of all the times that I've meditated, I've never experienced anything like this before. And I had to stop, and I had to go and attend to the affairs of the day, and go work my day job and everything. And I mean, as I did so, though, there was a feeling, or an essence from this experience, that stayed with me. Some aspect of it, like, stayed with me. And when I got done with work that day, I went right back home, and the first thing I wanted to do is meditate again, because I'm like, is it still? I mean, I wanted to make sure that it was still there, and it was still there. And this went on for days, weeks, and just kind of blended in and integrated with my life, going forward. And all these other things changed also, like almost immediately. They began to change, and immediately began to move in a different direction, and into areas, specifically one being diet, and the other being in sexuality. And my diet, as I mentioned, my diet had been pretty bad, as far as like eating lots of carbs and fried food, restaurant food, basically. So I was traveling so much, I was eating restaurant food, and just pretty much all restaurant food is bad. And I had been drinking too much. And this is a habit I picked up in college, and was definitely accentuated during my days in a touring band, and it just like stuck with me. And I'd cut back over the years, or try to quit here and there over the years, and I'd always end back in the same place. Same thing with the diet. When I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, this is one of the first things I did, is start trying to change my diet in various ways, to try and fix it that way. And just nothing worked. The advice of the doctors, didn't work. Eat more grains, and fruits and vegetables, and and stuff like that, and nothing like really worked. Well, the day after this experience, it's like, I tried drinking again like a couple of times, and it's like I just didn't have the taste for it anymore. And so then I cut back to just drinking like during holidays, and then I eventually got to one Christmas, and it's like, it's just it's so not a pleasant taste and experience that I just if people are upset with me, I don't care anymore. I'm done with it. So I left that behind. My diet had kind of I'd kind of like been trending more in a ketogenic direction with my diet, or trying to trend in that direction. And the day after I went through this process, it's just all the things that used to tempt me, you know, mainly like breads and sweets and things like that. I no longer had the urge for it, the craving for it. There's something about the craving aspect that just kind of wasn't there anymore. And I have a craving, but that craving was for something else that was connected with this experience that I have, and the fact that at any time I could stop, close my eyes, return to my breath, and get and feel that, again, and feel that essence again. So I just kind of continued in that direction. Um, as far as like the question of sexuality, there becomes more of a, rather than externally focused, right? Like cravings that drive ordinary, sexuality, um, for external things and images and doing stuff. um, it's like that, all of that that focus is just kind of, it just kind of moved inward. It just kind of moved in internally. Um, so those are the really main things. I guess that's a nutshell of it. I don't know. Does that make sense to
Yeah,
you?
of course. Yeah, of course. Like so many, as kids, we ask the big questions. Not all kids, but some do, and they don't stop asking. And it happened to me, and I've seen it happen to many others. We don't stop asking these big questions, and eventually we come to a point like, what you're describing here, where we turn inwards and we find that, the answers to the big questions, you could say, are inside, as well as the source of true fulfillment. It's not really found in alcohol or drugs or sex or junk food and whatnot. So it's all within, right? It's all within, and that's what this process is about, this inner transformation of Kundalini. So I'm curious, you were exploring things like ceremonial magic. I take it that you had some sense of energy, some sense of the metaphysical. You had been practicing chakra meditations, working with the chakras. When you had experienced this sort of welling up of those pleasant sensations in the body in meditation, was there a point where you figured out that you're dealing with Kundalini? What was that like for you? Were you confused? How did you come across the term Kundalini and sort of put the pieces together?
So that's a great question. So I didn't really understand what had happened, and the word Kundalini didn't appear in my mind. Um, I'd come across the term before. I'd come across the concept of Kundalini before, but I had simply presumed that it was some sort of metaphorical, that I already understood all of this in some metaphorical sense, and I already had whatever it was that was supposed to bring. that's the danger of understanding the world entirely with the head brain. I agree with Gurdjieff that really we have three brains. We have a head brain, we have an emotional brain, and then we have a physical, moving, instinctive center um, down there as well. But the intellectual mind really just loves these great ideas and loves to think that it knows everything and that it's already figured everything out. So this experience was kind of a shock to that previous belief. And I was sort of on a new search at that point to try and understand what had happened. And I remembered a book that I had read when I was much younger called Secret of the Golden Flower. And I thought, it seems like that's relevant. I'm going to read that again. So I went and I did read it again. And it's like it was just describing it was describing everything that I was experiencing, the breath, the slowing of the breath, and the welling up of sensation and attention. They use this term circulation of the light, circulating the light. And it occurred to me that when they say light, they're referring to attention. One way of understanding light in these texts is attention. And I think it's similar in the Bible too. A lot of these ancient texts, when they talk about light, what that means is like attention. Um, and 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 then as I explored that, I found some other books by a guy named J.J. Semple, who had also had an experience and found Secret of the Golden Flower, and he articulated a lot of this, that it's Kundalini. He directly made that connection that this is Kundalini, and the ancient Taoists, they knew about it and used different terminology for it. And through studying some of his works, I came upon the works of Gopi Krishna, who had a Kundalini awakening in the 60s or 50s. He lived in India.
Sorry, Paul.
Huh?
I don't know if I think it cut off just as you mentioned the name of that individual. Would you mind repeating that?
Yeah. Gopi Krishna.
Perfect.
Gopi Krishna, who is Indian and had a Kundalini awakening in the 50s, and he started writing tons of books on it. And his major work on it is called Living with Kundalini. And I found that book also further explained a lot of this. And one of the things that he talks about is that when you go back and you look at religion and all these ancient systems, you find the unmistakable stamp, earmarks of the cult of Kundalini. In other words, this knowledge of this was everywhere. This is the basis of all initial religions and esoteric spiritual systems, is really based on this. But as time went on, that was forgotten, or else the religions were taken over by people who had not had awakenings, or had, and what they do is they just sort of imitate. They imitate the results or the symptoms of the awakenings without going into the actual practices of it. And so in that one statement of Gopi Krishna's, that explained my experience with religion, my experience with occultism, and all these other esoteric systems that I had explored. Is that they're just talking a long time ago. The actual practice was lost. Now the exception to this, of course, is if you get into Eastern and especially Vedantic, Indian Sanatan Dharma practices also have this idea, has not been lost at all. But it's certainly been lost to the West. I mean, I think we can make a general, the West as like, lost touch with this practice. We have all these ideas and a moral philosophy that would go along well with it if people for awakened people, but unfortunately it's going along with people who aren't really awakened, and they're not really being encouraged to. So they're just becoming, they have become systems of control. So I've adopted the term specifically in regard to Christianity, because as I went through my awakening process, one of the other things that I revisited was the New Testament, the Bible in general, and specifically the New Testament, and discovering, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of really meaningful stuff in here that has to do with this experience. And so I've adopted the terminology of like church Christianity versus esoteric Christianity to try and describe the difference, because the church variety of mass religion is really, well, all that most people are familiar with is like that's all it is. But what I have come to suspect is that they have lost the secret to that, and the secret has to do with the process that one goes through in order to have an awakening, which is going back to Secret of the Golden Flower. They talk about the 100 days, and they say that you practice the stillness meditation practice for 100 days. After 100 days, the primal spirit comes to dwell within. And that 100 days that's not literally exactly 100 days. You have to understand how people spoke in metaphors back then about these, or about these hard to understand things. That 100 days, well, that probably just means a long time. It means you do it until I've forgotten how long I was trying to do this, and I'm not watching. You can't go like mark off on the calendar 100 days till Kundalini awakening. So this kind of gets back to the book that I'm working on, Second Awakening, which I am currently aiming to have this released through Amazon in June 1st. It's a analysis of Secret of the Golden Flower and the commonalities that I found between that teaching and Kundalini and esoteric Christianity and Zoroastrianism and a few other things that go along with it as well as my personal experience of having this what I call a second awakening. Now, what is the second awakening? What happened to the first? That's the question that everyone has. So a first awakening is the awakening that everyone has. I had a first awakening today. And I had and for most people, that's it. You only wake up once during the day, and then you go back to sleep, wake up again the next day. Or you can also look at it in terms of a lifetime, that my first awakening is awakening to existence in this world, being born into this world. And for most people, that is all that they will have. They will only have that first awakening into life. Now, I believe that a second awakening, which is facilitated by something, by what we would call a Kundalini experience, I believe that in ancient times, that it was probably a natural kind of process that people went through in the same way that we go through puberty naturally. Like everyone goes through this like total, physiological, biological emotional, spiritual transformation, at some point between, whatever ages that is. And I do submit the possibility that second awakening, that we used to have a second puberty. And that is like, as you become older, you go through this process and become spiritual. And this probably corresponds within, in Eastern systems, there's this idea at the age of, the first 20 years of life, you're growing up and learning. The next 20 years of life you spend working, becoming a householder. The next 20 years of life, then you become spiritual. And that's almost like where, like, it's sort of like encoded into the life cycle that you would go through this process during this time period. And like a puberty, there's a sort of a shift in sexuality focus. There's a shift in energy and how we process energy. There's a shift in like the kind of foods and how foods affect us and all these kinds of things. There's lots of very similar physiological aspects to a Kundalini awakening that make it very similar to natural puberty. That I consider that there could be something to that.
Fascinating, Paul. For those curious, the links to Second Awakening will be in the description. Once the book is out, I will make sure that the description is updated with the links. This is very fascinating stuff here. Essentially, this is why I'm hosting this podcast with so many different guests from all walks of life, which is to show that this is a universal human phenomena around which different traditions and religions have been formed. And it only makes sense, right? If there was no culture or religion or spiritual tradition around anywhere in the world, but this was a natural consequence of human development, the second awakening, the second puberty, well, then naturally those people would, go through this process, likely would cultivate some gifts, some wisdom, some insight, some influence over the people in their communities. And that influence would, of course, be the basis of a new culture, a new religion, a new tradition. And that's why it looks different all around the world. But there are these common themes of, like you described, a spiritual transformation taking place within the body, within the system, cultivating peace, right? Bringing about insights into the nature of reality and all of that far out stuff. So once again, here we have Paul, another individual coming from a very unique walk of life, but arriving at the same place, which is, of course, second awakening, puberty. Very interesting stuff. I was speaking with somebody the other day and they were commenting, I think it's too late for me. I guess they were in their middle age, and they said, I think it's too late for me in this lifetime to awaken and whatnot. And I said, no, not at all, right? And I spoke to the point that you were sharing, that in some cultures, once you get older, that's when the time to dedicate your life to spiritual practice really is. Even we can segue into talking a little bit about Ram Dass, because I know that you mentioned him in our conversation on your podcast, but he mentions that there was a lot of young teenagers around the time of the hippie movement, and they were taking psychedelics and discovering the spiritual path beyond ego without having yet formed an ego to begin with. And that created all sorts of turbulence in their lives. It's very confusing. And some may look to a person like me and say, wow, you're so young. I don't know anything besides this path. And that's actually made life somewhat confusing. I never really established myself in any meaningful way to then use that as a platform to begin the spiritual journey outside of it, if that makes sense. I was just thrust into having nowhere to land, not even within my own self, no developed sense of self. So it makes perfect sense that as people reach the age where they've established a career, a family, then they turn inwards. And it makes a lot of sense. I think in our culture it's necessary as well, because once again, we will give respect and reverence to our elders, right? In our culture in the West, like you described, being disconnected from spirituality, perhaps that's why we, you know, opt to, neglect our elders, those that are getting older. We kind of just put them in a home or something and move on with our lives, right? But, you know, it's it's a good second career, you could say, to also establish some wisdom and to offer some insight to the younger generations. But anyway, I'm rambling there. Talk to me a little bit about Ram Dass, because I know in our previous conversation it came up a little bit. How's Ram Dass played a role in your journey so far?
Well, it's really interesting. So, a couple months ago, I noticed Hanuman was trending on X, and Hanuman is the Indian monkey god that represents dharma and virtue and fighting the good fight and things like this. And I I've been aware of Hanuman for a while, and also the Chinese monkey. My zodiac is monkey, so I've always been interested in the Eastern, anything dealing with Eastern monkey stuff. And it was trending because there's this new film out in India that was a blockbuster in India, um, and and I saw some previews of it. It looks like a kind of superhero kind of thing. This boy gets powers from Hanuman and kicks ass on some bad guys. And I thought, oh my God, this is awesome. I have to see this. So I started searching for theaters in Houston, where I live, that would have this playing. And it's not playing widely in the US at all, but I did find one theater that was playing it. So I went to the movie, by myself, and and as the film was progressing, um, and it's great. It's a super exciting film. Watching it, getting really into it, and then there's a certain point in the film where they flash this. There's all sorts of like religious imagery, and I'm just aware of this as I'm watching it. There's esoteric stuff and philosophy and all this stuff that I don't know about because I have not read the Mahabharata or the Ramayana. I had read the Bhagavad Gita just recently before this, which seemed like another interesting synchronicity that this Indian stuff like comes up. So anyhow, there's a moment where they flash this image on the screen, and I don't know what it is. There's some Sanskrit symbol, and just in that moment, I had this realization that all of my past selves, which we've been talking about through this discussion, the 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 child, the rock and roller, the consultant, this and that, and everything, that all of them were like fake. All of them were false. All of them were transient in some sense, like not real. And rather than feeling, oh no, part of myself, I'm losing part of myself and it's falling away. No, it felt like this incredibly liberating, just this liberating feeling that there's something, there's an I am underneath it all, that is more substantial than any of that. And um, so anyhow, because of that, then I went online afterwards and I was looking for stuff about Hanuman and about the Ramayana, and I found Ram Dass. There's a talk of him giving, um, telling the story, an abbreviated story of the Ramayana with Hanuman and the avatar Rama, the hero Rama, and all of their adventures and stuff like that. And I was like, I actually had his book Be Here Now. I'm a big bookworm, but it's one of the books I've had on my shelf for like a few decades. And probably I accrued it because I knew that he was connected with Timothy Leary, and he was also connected with Robert Anton Wilson. So from the Timothy Leary starting point, which goes down to say Ram Dass and Robert Anton Wilson and probably some other people, my early development went the Robert Anton Wilson direction, which is the way of like more psychedelics, Aleister Crowley, Illuminatus, conspiracy theories, all of these things that Robert Anton Wilson was into. But I was aware of Ram Dass from that time period. So all of a sudden I had this injection of, wait, maybe Ram Dass is talking about, some of these things that just kind of like went by me, early on. And so that set me on a deep dive into Ram Dass, and I read some of his books, and I think there's definitely something in there. There's all, and you mentioned the question of like, other people who got involved with him at the time, and I feel like you always have to like kind of make a distinction between a teaching and a person who delivers, the teaching, and versus organizations. It's like organizations are the things that kind of change and ebb and flow, and then they have problems, and they have human problems, and different things happen with them. And I found that I just have to kind of like separate that question of organizations and what other people did. I mean, because one of the things that initially like kind of like made me, probably steered me away from Ram Dass and everything, is that, well, that's like the hippie generation, that's all baby boom. That's not my generation, right? They don't the people I know from that generation, look down on us when we were kids and all of that like kind of stuff. So that kind of like created a barrier in it. But now, that now that I'm older is probably part of it too, that things like that aren't such an issue anymore, and just getting to the essence of what he was talking about, and especially that he reveals so much of it in his in stories, in stories about what happened to him. So yeah, when you mentioned him on our last conversation, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, Ram Dass, super influential for me too. It's interesting that you had the book, Be Here Now. And when the time is right, that only at that point can we really hear what we need to hear, right? It can be sitting on your shelf for decades. It's very interesting. But even as you were describing that you were, when you're watching that movie, and those layers, those identities began to sort of fall away, you know, um, that's the same thing that happened to Ram Dass on his first, mushroom trip. The idea of him being a professor and whatnot, just it all fell away, and that was the beginning of his spiritual journey. So it's very interesting that you had a very sort of similar, if not, practically the same realization in relation to Hanuman. Of course, Hanuman um, being the deity that Ram Dass's guru was, such a devotee of Hanuman. Interesting. Yeah, some interesting synchronicities take place with some of these deities for me. There was a time where I was really into Hanuman, and I went to buy a used pair of speakers. I'm into some vintage audio and stuff. And anyway, I go to this guy's house to buy these speakers. He takes me in the basement, and there's just this huge Hanuman statue there in his basement. And it was kind of out of place, but I just said, that's why I came to this guy's house to buy these speakers. Just Hanuman showing up for me. Interesting stuff like that takes place. So I'm curious on that note, do you have a relationship with the divine, with God, with a particular deity? How do you relate with something that, maybe you consider to be larger than this idea of Paul?
Well, I do believe that there is a um, a divine principle of causation and creation and consciousness. Um, uh, a lot of the people I used to talk to a lot, we use the term the principle of isolated intelligence to refer to this. And I think I've found that, God, yeah, I mean, we can say God, but that's one of those terms that's like so loaded, and there's so much baggage associated with the term God in our culture that you just as well not use it, because, I mean, if there's 20 people in the room, 20 people are going to have a different understanding of what that means. Gurdjieff used to say, for some people, God is a policeman, you know? So I think that I found the Zoroastrian system has a very, very, very good and very resonant to me way of talking about God as Ahura Mazda, wise Lord, or Lord consciousness, that it can be translated as, and that the idea is that Ahura Mazda, the principle of consciousness, becoming aware of entropy, aware of the force of like chaos in the world, which will eventually subsume his creation. In order to put that off, basically created the Fravashi, or basically like you could say like angels, and that's how all human beings like start out like that, as a divine being. And then, really you could have stayed a divine being sleeping in the cosmic womb for forever, but you also become aware of this cosmic imbalance, or this cosmic disharmony, or this cosmic injustice that's like occurring in the world because of the passage of time and entropy and chaos that exists in the world. And so you voluntarily make this decision to go be born into the world and to fight for truth and harmony and consciousness and all of these things. And that's sort of the Zoroastrian, in a nutshell, Zoroastrian explanation of how we end up coming into this world. And it's not too different. When you get down to it, to the other religions at the core of it, it's not too different, the explanation for how we get here. In the Hindu, the idea of Brahman, or the absolute, there's an absolute principle that then divides into three, what is it, like Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, I think it is. And then from there, there's further divisions and avatars down into reality. And this pattern very much follows any, like, the Greek Western, philosophers, follow the same idea. Plato very much follows the same idea of this pattern of an ideal principle gradually descending down into the material, complex, the phenomenal world that we live in. And that by tracing back, like, causality leads us towards this conclusion that there's something, that there's an absolute principle behind it. So that's that's the intellectual. That's me unpacking it all with my head brain, which really can't feel any of this or have any real sensation of any of this stuff. But I think through the practice, one may gain a greater sense of connection with something else. And it can be, so the head brain has a hard time wrapping itself around this because it thinks it's going to lose itself, right? And that the intellectual mind doesn't want to lose itself. It wants to hang on and be in charge, be the one in charge of everything, and know everything about everything. It gets into something that it doesn't know about, so it doesn't like that. But as we develop these other parts of ourselves, and activate a higher life force, a higher sense of consciousness, that Kundalini force within us, we gain a better sense of connection with the absolutes, with the divine, with the primal cause, or the primal spirit, as they say in the Secret of the Golden Flower. And
Brilliant.
it's I think that's the most that we can really say about it with words, is that there's a connection that's like created there, and beyond this, it has to be just experienced and known personally and individually, and I I have to be able to reach a point where I can, let go of the known, let go of the need to know everything, and have trust in a higher principle that can transform me. Because that's what we're talking about, I believe, with this experience. We're talking about it's a higher force that enters into one, that in some sense, is always there in potential, but in the moment of our existence, it really comes and enters and connects, and in that connection, one's sense of a higher becomes manifested.
Right. Right. And just like with puberty, a young child cannot know what's on the other side. They can observe maybe in other people, but they can't know what they will feel like in their body. They can't know exactly what to even do. They have to, surrender to the body's intelligence itself. And there's a mysterious element here, right? It's like a mysterious element to what this really is. We've got some really great words, some really great symbols and systems that unpack it. But if I'm not mistaken, even in something like Taoism, the secret of the golden flower, there isn't necessarily a particular deity that is, very obvious and clear in those systems. Whereas in other systems, we have this relationship with Shiva or with Christ in terms of the consciousness and whatnot. But I think anybody who comes to this at a certain point recognizes that the specific manifestations, even of Hanuman, of Rama, they are pointers to something even more, I think the word primordial, something even more formless, that absolute principle, which is completely beyond words. We can't know it with the mind. The mind is just too incapable of that. So that's interesting. I personally, I relate a lot with the Divine Mother. That context is very suitable for me. It feels right to have a relationship with her. But on a deeper level, I know that there isn't actually a Divine Mother figure out there. It's just the flow, you know, it's just that same absolute principle that you're speaking about. So it's interesting I always like to wonder about how people relate with this energy, this force, this power. Everyone's got some different relationship, and yeah, I like yours. I know others out there, they hear these terms, the Divine Mother or God the Father, and they don't really relate with that kind of stuff, but they tune into something a little bit more general, and it speaks to them. Great.
Yeah.
So
So
go ahead.
um, in Taoism, I think it's really Tao. Just that concept of Tao is the absolute, that is just like completely, it's the absolute. And because we need something that we can chew on a little bit more, we end up with these representations of the absolute, Christ, or the Divine Mother. Um, Ramakrishna, one of the saints, Indian saints I've studied recently, was into Kali, the Divine Mother. His whole teaching was about you know utilize Kali, but it's still the same. There's Kundalini, there's Brahma, there's the Absolute. All the same principles are there, and it's just like just because of different happenstance and everything of our existence, we have a different palette, for these sorts of things. We have a different semantic system, a different language that we need to find to be able to make this particular connection. I was going to say, when one of the other things that I did when I after I'd had this experience and I read the book, is I'm searching online and I'm looking on YouTube for things, and once I got cued into the fact that Kundalini is one of the terms representing this experience, well then, there's just a flood of information, a flood of people making videos on YouTube, and that's how I found you. And as I would watch these people talking about their experiences, and I approached it very skeptical. I was very skeptical at first, but I'd listen to people's experiences and listen to them talk, and wherever they were coming from, I just I heard specific, the specific common things in my experience, and just got that feeling of something, and it just led me further and further to realize that there is this there's an awakening happening in general. There's a lot of this going on. I know you've talked about it. I've heard other people like talk about it. JJ Simple, he talks about it. And what they had in the East, and maybe to some extent still have, I don't know, is there's a support for it, right? There's systems and teachings that talk about this, whereas like in the West we don't really have that sort of support thing. Is not like a given. I mean, you're kind of lucky if you fall into it. So, and I think that that's something that makes a difference, because there's those people who have an awakening without any kind of oh well, what do I do? Whereas like when you look at like Secret of the Golden Flower, the teaching in there says, it's like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry buckets of water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry buckets of water, right? So you have this you have this meditation practice, as the basis of your practice, whether you feel you're awakened or not. You've set that aside in order to cultivate stillness within yourself. So so it's an interesting situation that we have right now, I think, because people are experiencing this, and they're able to find information about it, and hopefully that can lead them into the direction. But some people talk about having a negative Kundalini waking experience, or experience happens and it takes them to some crazy places before it gets there somewhere good. And I think that's one of the reasons, when you look in the ancient systems, they have these suggestions for how to go about things and how to practice this, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Even looking into some of the work about spiritual emergency by Stan Groff and some others that are very involved in helping people through these transformations that are happening more and more frequently at this time. Even Dr. Yvonne Cason, speaking about spiritual transformative experiences, the number one way that we can support individuals going through this is just validating them and letting them know that nothing is necessarily going wrong. It's a sense of community. It just makes all the difference. because this process, it's self-organizing, it's self-limiting, it sort of handles itself. It's just the individual mind comes in and says something is going wrong. What is this? It's so scary. And then that's what can cause a lot of issues. But if we have support, we have community, we have people around that are saying, hey, yeah, this sort of thing happened to me too. Here's some avenues to research and find out a bit more to create some context. A lot more people can go through it quite smoothly. And so I'm really appreciative of what the work that you're doing, with your podcast, having some conversations about this. I know you've got on your show some talks about the golden flower. You've got some conversation with JJ Simple. So I invite others to check out Paul's YouTube channel, Paul Fredric. The link will be in the description as well. You've got your books out, and I'm looking forward to Second Awakening coming soon. The link will be in the description as well once that's out. So, Paul, before we wrap up, I just wanted to touch quickly on the topic of creativity. Of course, you've been a creative person for a long, long time with music, with writing, prior to the awakening. You've already got a book flowing through you, Second Awakening. Has this inspired you in a new way? Has it changed the way that you are doing creative work? Has there been any implications around your role as a creative person since this awakening?
You know, it's kind of hard to say because I did so much creation beforehand. Um, I've just always been a creative individual. My dad got me playing the viola when I was like 6 years old, and got me a guitar and stuff. And so it's like music has always been a part of my life. Um, but I think one thing I can say that I feel has changed on the other side of this is the need. This is going to sound funny, but after we get to the end of this, the need to put it out there, the need to go to press with it and get it out there. So, like I said, I spent about a decade uh, trying to make it as a professional musician and self-releasing CDs and stuff like that, and trying to streamline the whole process from coming up with a song to and this was all DIY, you know, um, getting from the point of coming up to a song to getting the CD out, and really focusing on the results, focusing on the results and the external production of the result. And on the other side of it, my approach to creation has been very much, it has been more internal, that it is for me only. Now I know I am putting out another book, but a lot of my music that I've been working on has just been completely on my own. Like I started taking um, vocal lessons. I became aware that after, spending, over a decade, as a singer in a band, I became aware of the fact that my vocals were very poor and sadly untrained. And so I started taking lessons and studying opera and stuff like that. And I've done a few small performances for small group of people, type situations, but have more of a satisfaction from the work, right? It's like I get more from the work just out of doing the work. And I realized as I was discussing this is the same pattern as the backward flowing method, as they call it in The Secret of the Golden Flower. The internal, the instead of tossing that energy out there everywhere into the world, rather taking that energy up into oneself where it's consumed as a higher form of nourishment. So that is one way in which my perspective on the creative process has changed, is that I look at it as more a part of my own higher nourishment process rather than trying to serve some external force, which always
Brilliant.
it
Yeah.
always leads to disappointment. So this is another thing that the like the Bhagavad Gita says, is that on renunciation, the way is not to renounce life, but to renounce your attachment to the results. Aleister Crowley, one thing he said that is still stuck with me is he says to overcome lust for results. Like whatever it is you're trying to create or do in the world, don't lust over the result of it. Do it and just, and that's it. And then just, walk away from it. Um, so um, so I think that there's something to that.
Yeah. And paradoxically, this is where the results do tend to be quite fruitful. Um, However, if you get that idea, it can be a little sticky idea. You can start to think, okay, I will get the best results if I'm not focused on the results. And then we're back again to being focused on the results.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very strong theme in Bhagavad Gita, right? We're entitled to the labor, but not the fruits of the labor. And the labor
Yeah.
itself is pure joy, right? It's pure joy to do this work, to express, to let it flow through us. I just pulled up a quote here. It's a Taoist quote. When an archer is shooting for nothing, he has all his skill. If he shoots for a brass buckle, he's already nervous. So that's how it is. So that's great. That's great. And I'm sure this is the opposite of selling out, right? This is the opposite of selling out.
It
And
is, and you know what? I feel like that is part of the second awakening too. That's part of the process of a Kundalini activation, is that the attention is like you're not completely focused on that one thing. Whenever you're focused on that one thing, there's something about the peripheral. There's something about the peripheral, the peripheral vision, expanding to the peripheral vision that causes something to happen. It's like a watch pot never boils. As long as you're focused on that one thing, if you're counting the calendar, like I'm meditating every day and I'm going to have a Kundalini awakening, and you're counting the days for it, then that's going to make it harder. But you let that idea of Kundalini just kind of seep down within you, and then focus on your work at hand and incorporate that sitting practice as just part of your, well, I get up in the morning, I brush my teeth, and then I do this, and then I go get my day going, and that sets up a pattern. That sets up a overall pattern in the rhythm of your life that starts to change things. And if all of your life before that, you wake up in the morning and you're just the first thing, every morning is taken off by chaos, by whatever you do, or the internet, or, whatever, then setting up that pattern will create an incredible change in the overall um, trajectory of life.
fantastic, practical, grounded, realistic advice. And the fact of the matter is, before Kundalini awakening or after Kundalini awakening, we still need those healthy patterns, those healthy rhythms of practice and exploration. So the work is the same. That's what I like to say in general. Before Kundalini awakening, during Kundalini awakening, and after Kundalini awakening, the work is the same. So for those who maybe aren't sure where they're at on the path, doesn't really matter. The work is the same. So
Mm-hmm.
that's it's fantastic, Paul. You shared a lot
Totally.
of wisdom, a lot of insight with us today. Very inspiring, especially the creative pursuits. And I look forward to reading The Second Awakening. I invite the audience to visit Paul's channel on YouTube, the podcast, Daimonosophy. Is that available on other platforms as well, the podcast?
Yeah, it's YouTube, it's Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher, and other things like that.
Perfect, perfect. Paul's bands, Morphine Angel, Asmodeus X, Nibu Generator, and his other book, The Airbeth Transmissions. Check it all out. Very interesting stuff, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your wisdom. Once again, showing us that this Kundalini awakening process, mysterious as it is a universal human phenomena. And we're not alone. We're all going to be okay, one day at a time. Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks to our audience for tuning in, spending some time with us. We'll catch you on the next episode. Much love.
Thank you so much, Bren. I appreciate it. Keep fighting the good fight.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you. Take care now.